Our next moderator will be Representative Rick Roth. He was elected to the Florida House in 2016. He's the president and principal owner of Roth Farms, serves as the vice chair of the Ag and Natural Resources Appropriations Subcommittee, and currently on the board of directors for the Western Palm Beach County Farm Bureau. Welcome, Representative Roth.
Thanks, sir. Well, we have 30 minutes and we just ate 8 of them, so we're in trouble already. So I am not going to do what I wanted to do, which is introduce these 3 speakers. I had breakfast with them at 8 o'clock this morning, and we have such an exciting topic that there's no byline. It just says aquatic weed management. But I'm telling you, I'm totally impressed with these 3 gentlemen. I think we're all going to learn a lot. In the words of Roger Stone, I'm really looking forward to what I'm going to learn today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Dr. Jason Farrell. Go Gators. I do want to say one thing about him, that he has published over 100 scientific journals, and he is the director of the U.S. Center for Aquatic Invasive Plants. Go Gators.
Well, thank you all for allowing us to be here today. And what I want to talk a little bit about is invasive plants. So we want to start with what is an invasive plant, and it's one that's not native to the United States. So we have a lot of native plants that evolved here, and they also co-evolved with certain pests and diseases and insects that help keep them in check. Since invasive plants are not from here, they come in with a clean slate, and they're able just to really rampage across our environment because they don't have the natural predators. A good example of this, and the plant I want to highlight, is water hyacinth. The story is that it was given away as a water garden plant at the World's Fair in 1884. It found its way to Florida. It soon overran their water garden, so they took care of it by pitching it into the St. Johns River. Within just a few years, it began to completely cease commerce on the St. Johns River. You can see these plants grow very tightly together to the point that the cargo ships were not even able to come and dock. So there was tremendous economic impact and loss of use of the river. By just a few years later, this plant had found itself across the entire state. And this is a picture of Lake Okeechobee in 1937, where they're bringing in heavy equipment to dredge and try to remove these plants. But this was a very slow, very expensive process, and soon everyone with an idea started to try to figure out how to build a better mousetrap. There were all types of saw boats and machines to try to break up these mats so that they would float away and stop being so problematic. Now, anytime you see someone showing pictures from 1937 or before, the question is, how can this be an issue today? This is a 100-year-old problem, and since that time, we've split the atom, we've eradicated polio, and we put a man on the moon. So how is water hyacinth still a concern? Well, this is a picture of the mid-90s from a reservoir in Texas. They had an extremely successful project where they were managing this plant, so successful that they felt that they didn't need to do it anymore. So they walked away, and this is a picture 8 months later. So you have to realize this plant has exponential growth capacity. It doubles in number every 10 to 14 days, and as soon as you turn your back on an invasive plant is when you start losing. And if you think it's not an issue in Florida, still to this day, this is a picture I took 2 years ago of the Cross Florida Barge Canal. There are over 4 miles of floating plants that are clogging this canal and causing tremendous economic impact, even within our state currently. So why is it a problem? Well, the way these aquatic systems work is you need native plants in that system. Sunlight penetrates the water column, photosynthesis occurs, and it releases oxygen into the water to support all the life. When you completely cover over the surface, not only does photosynthesis cease from plants as well as your algae and other small floating plants, you end up with no oxygen being produced and actually oxygen being consumed as decay occurs in that system. So you can have no fish in this system, but it is perfect mosquito habitat. So you start linking yourself up for a human health crisis. Moreover, this provides tremendous resistance to water movement. So if you are needing this canal for flood protection and flood control, it is no longer going to be able to serve in that way because the plants will simply prevent the water from moving, which is a critical concern considering there is a hurricane coming to our state as we speak.
Dr. Farrell, you got about 2 minutes because they they cut our time, and if you're going to let the other guys talk, you
Yes,
got to
sir.
cut it short.
So we manage in a lot of different ways. One way is a mechanical application, but like all things, there are pros and cons. So here's the one that is managing, but also you have concerns with scale. How can this machine keep up, as well as where are you going to put the material? We're talking thousands of cubic yards of material to be disposed of. So we commonly use chemical means. Our idea here is to use chemicals at the least amount possible. If you have an acre of water hyacinth, it requires 2 pounds of active ingredient to manage it. But if you control one plant, it will never become an acre, and now all of a sudden you have a few grams of herbicide to deal with. But no management decisions are ever created by trial and error. It is all evidence-based science, and the University of Florida has partnerships with the Army Corps of Engineers, with water management, and the Florida Fish and Conservation Group, who manages our public water. So we provide data, they then make their management decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Carlton Lane is next. I'll just say very briefly about him. He's got a lot of experience with rules and procedures involving registration and re-registration of pesticides. He has deals with actually in development of how to apply chemicals in the field. So Carlton, take it away.
Thank you. Building on what Jay talked about, the science then goes to EPA. So there's a chemical that someone thinks has the potential to be a pesticide. Remember, a pesticide is the broadest term that can be used. It includes and encompasses herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, rodenticides, all the different sides that are out there, including repellents. So once a chemical company or individual thinks they have a product that has potential to be a pesticide, based on the science that's been generated, they go to EPA. Tens of millions of dollars of an investment. We can prove that. There's a minimum of 120 basic studies that have to be submitted to EPA. If it's an aquatic herbicide, it goes up to about 150 studies. All have to be done under good laboratory practices. So once EPA then registers the product, then it comes to Florida. The parallel to the federal oversight of pesticides in Florida is the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. They have a pesticide registration group as well, and they look at how a product is going to be used in the state and may require additional studies be conducted to show that there can be no unreasonable adverse effect on human health or the environment when used as directed. So once the product is out there, oversight doesn't end. There's the pesticide area of EPA has the federal pesticide law requires that no individual can use a pesticide in a manner inconsistent with its label. If so, that's a violation of federal law. There's a parallel provision under Chapter 482 Florida statutes that the Department of Agriculture oversees. And there are people in the field that are actually conducting routine inspections of licensed pesticide applicators, and also for cause inspections if there are citizen complaints or there are incidents that require some more intense oversight. Along with the pesticide oversight, there also is the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act requires that any product that's used in, over, or near waters of the United States requires an NPDES permit. And so DEP is the state agency that's enforcing that provision. And it requires permit applications and oversight and reporting. And Florida has a fairly unique history of pesticide use and managing aquatic plants. Goes back to 1960, even a little before that.
Carlton, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes so we can get the next guy. Sorry.
Thank you, no problem. So in Florida, there's been a cooperative enforcement agreement between EPA and the Department of Agriculture since 1982. They actually are state inspectors that carry federal credentials to enforce both the federal and the state law. And under The Clean Water Act is a completely delegated program to DEP, and they are working with FWC, Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, on aquatic permitting and monitoring of that. So, I mean, it's almost cradle to grave that the herbicides and algicides that are registered for use in Florida are monitored from their production all the way through to the ultimate use and even disposal.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I want to introduce Jerry Rennie. He has over 30 years' experience on the ground, or maybe I should say in the boat, experience with applied aquatic management. He has done numerous aquatic vegetation management programs in the South Florida Water Management District area and also in some other areas of the state, including Manatee County. So I'm going to go ahead and let Jerry take the last 7 minutes, and we're going to try to have a couple minutes to wrap up. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, as Carlton was referencing, part of why we wanted to come here, looking back through the agenda of this meeting over the last several years, I think this is somewhat new. And our industry is somewhat new to a lot of people. A lot of the general public, they don't understand that it exists. They don't know that it goes on, sort of out of sight, out of mind. They just know that the ditches and canals that are near their homes and properties, they drain. The system functions. Well, it functions because thanks to the science, and thanks to the regulatory agencies, and in probably no small part, thanks to my coworkers and colleagues, it's maintained that way. So for my part here today is just to represent my coworkers as applicators in the field and what we do, and the oversight that comes from what Carlton had referenced to attest that it is real. The science is proven. It is decades old. The regulatory bodies, whether it be the EPA or here in the state of Florida, FDACS, it exists. Throughout the year, we are inspected. The treatments are inspected on a regularly occurring basis. When those inspections occur, an FDACS inspector comes to us and they want to look at the treatment. They want to make sure or ensure that the treatments are being done in accordance with the label. And for a lot of people, they kind of take the statement that we use, the label is the law, as a cliche. And that's sort of the hitch pin to our industry. And that's what we try to implement in our programs, is the understanding, as we are all licensed applicators, that that label is the law. I think everybody uses chemicals in some capacity in their life. And there may be a label on that container. But whether or not they really follow that label is up to them. And if they don't follow it, there may not be any oversight or any downside to whether they follow the label or not. For us, there absolutely is. It has a law that says that if we misuse that pesticide, we're in violation of a federal law. And we take that very seriously. To follow up with that point, our training continues on with that. The state of Florida allows that one licensed applicator can oversee up to 15 unlicensed applicators. We take it a step further. With the company that I work for, we mandate that all of our applicators become licensed individually. We give them a very short period of time to become licensed, and as part of that licensing, it is to ensure, once again, that they know how to understand that label, how to follow it as it is a federal law, and to ensure that we are not found in violation of that. If you misuse a pesticide in your private life, maybe there might not be any harm to anyone else outside of your own home. But for us, we work in the public sector, and we take it very seriously that everything that we do has an effect on the public water bodies of the state of Florida. And
Ken, we'll give you 2 more minutes.
there's nothing more precious than that. As evidenced by your attendance here, by the fact that this group exists, I think it's important that we understand that aquatic plant management is a necessary component of maintaining our Florida waterways. And please understand that the science supports it, the regulatory agencies follow it, and the applicators in the field, the boots on the ground, the men and women in the boats, take it very seriously, are licensed, and the applications are being done properly.
Okay, so I want to start with the first question. I'm not sure who's going to answer it. It might be you, Jerry, and it also might be it might be the other two, but the main question I think people want to know is how can we use the science to control the aquatic species that are causing the problem and use the least amount of chemical possible? Do the job the best we can. How do we do that? I think we know that, right?
For me, as a manager, as the person who has to see that the job is done, maintenance control, we found decades ago, is key. We want to maintain plants at the lowest feasible level. If we allow them to grow, as Jay referenced, to larger quantities, we're going to have to work harder, use more herbicides, possibly have some more adverse effects, certainly on the biodiversity, because we've allowed those invasive species to proliferate, and possibly have flood control issues if we plug a system. So we want to keep those plants under that maintenance control level.
So the two things that are important is doing it on a timely basis and also using the correct dosage so you make sure you're getting the best bang for the buck.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's two ways of managing plants. You can use crisis management. You wait until there's a problem and then you address it. And then that's always the wrong time to act. As Jerry indicated, when you go out and you are very aggressive and you're very proactive, you control very few plants and you prevent a crisis from ever occurring. And that's where we try to be, and that's where we have historically been as a state.
I think everybody understands. If you just drive up and down the interstate, you see kudzu all over the place, and you wonder, how in the world are we ever going to get that? It's the same issue with aquatic plants. We have such a subtropical climate. We have nutrients in the water. We have 14 hours days of sunlight in the summertime. So aquatic weed management is a big, big, big issue. But I think the good news we can take away from this panel is there's really no news story. There is nothing exciting to talk about, because exciting to talk about would be bad news. The good news is if we can do the job and manage the species that we're trying to manage and keep it small and less number of square feet we have to spray, we can actually use less chemicals. Unfortunately, I do want to editorialize a little bit and say you get environmental science kind of clashing with real science and saying we need to cut down on the amount of pesticides used, and then it gets out of hand, and as Dr. Farrell said, you now have a crisis. So any last remarks anybody wants to say? I'll give you one last minute.
Well, I would just say that we need to keep in mind the difference between real science that's developed under peer review and publications, as opposed to what appears on the internet. That the internet is not peer reviewed, but it's the internet is sometimes the loudest voice and the weakest argument. And that gets lost when we start shifting around with issues that arise. Sometimes it's that voice that we hear, and then agencies and politicians, present company excluded, of course, that react to that clamor as opposed to what the reasonable science says. So that's my cautionary statement, that we need to be sure that we're listening to the scientists and we're acting on with good judgment in that respect.
We've got 2 more minutes. You got a minute? Jerry, you want to take 1 more minute? What would you say if you had 1 minute?
For many years, this industry kind of flew under the radar. Most people don't even know that it exists. From my private life of 31 plus years in the industry, I can tell you that very seldom do I encounter someone when they say, "Jerry, what do you do?" And I tell them what I do, they are puzzled. It's very seldom that someone says, "Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I understand that." It doesn't happen. So our hope here, or my hope here, is that we have planted some seeds of understanding that the industry has existed for many years. It's science-based, it's supported, and that understanding is enough to cause people to dig a little deeper if you have questions into the science. And as Carlton said, not react negatively and shut down a program or stop a program. But
Okay, Dr. Farrell, I'm going to ask you a loaded question, because it's one I like to ask. Are you part of the group at the University of Florida that's going to make sure we stay with the science and not bend to the emotional will of sometimes the public that we're not doing it right?
Well, the Vice President of Agriculture, Jack Payne, has come out many, many times very strongly for science. And he has consistently backed his faculty members when they are standing on science, and he backs them. Our university, our president backs science. So the university is not currently bending to public will.
Okay, folks, we were on schedule, so if you need somebody to keep you on schedule, you know who to use, Representative Roth. Thank you very much.